Hello, I was asked by a colleague to make a video discussing how I go about creating sacred space around those who are actively dying. And this video is not meant to be a how-to, but rather my personal reflections on how I have gone about um, the art of vigiling and creating sacred space. I embrace the definitions of sacred that are described for us from sources like Webster, Merriam, Oxford. And when defining sacred space, they say that it is space which is deserving veneration, connected to God or religious purpose, regarded with great respect and reverence, set apart from day to day, too valuable to be interfered with, devoted exclusively to one service, and something that is worth protecting and defending. At its most basic, sacred space around someone who is actively dying is the immediate square footage around the space where the person is laying. When I enter into the room where someone is close to death, I tend to come in slowly and stop about 8 feet from the bed. Please don't misunderstand. I don't measure, and no one told me that it should be 8 feet. This is just what has naturally come to me. During that unhurried entrance, I pause. I notice the countenance of the dying person and anyone else in the room. Does the space feel stagnant? Does the room feel energized? I also take note of the position of the dying person's body. What is their proximity to other people in the room, if there are other people in the room? Of course, I want to show respect to anyone else who's present, including the dying person, and that usually starts with an introduction, letting them know who I am and why I'm there. I am completely focused in the moment, and this usually leads me to noticing colors, objects, sounds, the temperature in the room, and by being completely present physically, mentally, emotionally, with intention, spiritually, it helps me notice even things that may seem inconsequential, like the lighting. If there is a breeze coming from somewhere, I usually discover clues about the dying person by being mindfully present, and I notice the dying person's breathing, and I notice my own breathing. And I don't know why, but I have found myself intentionally taking one or two breaths that I purposely synchronize with that of the dying person's breaths. When I contemplated on the dictionary's definitions of sacred, as that I shared with you just a few moments ago, part of those definitions included something that is to be protected and defended. And the idea of a gentle warrior came to mind, a crusader, if you will. And the dictionary describes that person as someone who is experienced in conflict or battle, someone who is brave, and an experienced serviceman. At times, I believe this battle is the dying person's. Not just what's taking place in the shutting down of the body, but what could be taking place for them internally, emotionally, and spiritually. Or the battle might come from the emotions of other people in the room. Sometimes the battle is for me to get out of the way of what this particular person's death journey is supposed to be, and for me to work diligently to keep my expectations and preferences outside of their sacred space. I had a lesson in this decades ago, long before I had the knowledge to even know what the lesson was that I was being taught. And I was an emergency medical technician assigned to an emergency room. I was a gentle warrior, but too inexperienced to know this. My time working in this emergency room, as well as time spent in the hospital's morgue with the medical examiner, were my first introductions to sacred space around the dying and after death. One of the most sacred moments I remember were the moments before and after the death of a man who had been brought in to the emergency room. His injuries from a car accident would soon cause his death. The usual noises and organized chaos surrounded him as the trauma team did what was in our limited power to do. The busyness subsided as the inevitable took place. My role switched from EMT to cleaning up a young man who would soon be dead. His parents were en route to the emergency room to see their son, hoping to arrive before he was pronounced dead. I could hear sounds of day-to-day busyness just outside the trauma room door. Of course, I had moments where thoughts entered in about how am I going to deal with the strong emotion about to be introduced by the parents? And what if I could not get him cleaned up adequately? But for the space to be sacred, in my opinion, my feelings and my past experiences, my agenda needed to be outside of that space. Eventually, the mental noise and the noise outside of the room faded away for me. I became completely present with this man. There was only that moment. And for me, it became an act of love to try to clean the blood off of this beautiful person. Blood that continued to come out of his ears and nose. And in that moment, I was a gentle warrior, protecting him, his space, and introducing a quiet presence into the chaos that had previously surrounded him. It became peaceful in that brightly lit room. I believe when his parents entered that room that day, they were able to enter a sacred space, a space where their son's spirit and who he was to them was unencumbered, unaffected by my agenda or even that of the hospitals. The moments to come between this man and his parents were taking place with reverence, a space that made sacred by protection was treated with great respect, and it left room for this man and his parents to have whatever their experience and their journey was meant to be. Most of the dying that you and I are likely to witness will not be in an emergency room. Rather, it will be expected. If you are working with the dying and doing vigiling and feel called to do that kind of service, most of you will have the opportunity of time and preparation. Time to consider the use of music, readings, stillness. My hope in sharing the emergency room story with you is to encourage you to think of sacred space as intentional focus on the dying, intentional vacancy of your own fears and agendas, and doing this regardless of whether your surroundings are neat and tidy or chaotic and noisy. If you are watching this video, you likely have an interest in this topic and are working with the dying or considering that type of service. And I believe that this is worth preparing for. As a matter of fact, I think it's a responsibility to prepare for. Sacred space is worth protecting. If I were asked to sum up creating sacred space into one sentence, it would be this: your complete availability and presence, along with intentional absence of your wants and needs, allows for sacred space. My name is Amy Billa, and I wish each of you the best on your individual journeys.